Imagine standing in the ruins of what was once humanity's greatest colony, surrounded by beings that could crush you with a thought, when suddenly, the most powerful entity in the known galaxy looks directly at you and speaks words that change everything. Not a threat, not a demand, but a recognition that sends chills down your spine and makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own past. Captain Sarah Chen had survived 3 alien invasions, lost her entire crew to the Void Hunters, and spent 2 years as the last human alive on the Outer Rim. She thought she knew what rock bottom looked like. She was wrong. Because when the Zephyrian Empress materialized before her in all her terrifying glory, 8 feet of crystalline armor and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 worlds, the first words from her lips weren't what any human would expect from an alien queen. "Human, my father knows you." For simple words that would unravel the greatest conspiracy in galactic history and reveal that humanity's role in the universe was far more significant than anyone had ever dared imagine. For words that would turn a broken survivor into the key to either humanity's ultimate triumph or its final extinction. This is the story of how one human discovered that sometimes, being remembered by the right person can be both salvation and damnation. Captain Sarah Chen pressed her back against the cold metal wall of what had once been Kepler Station's main corridor. The emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow, and the silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her helmet. 2 years. 2 years since the Void Hunters had swept through this sector like a plague, consuming everything in their path. 2 years since she'd watched her crew die one by one, their life signs winking out on her display like dying stars. She was supposed to be dead too. Hell, according to every database in the galaxy, she was dead. Captain Sarah Chen, service number 7749 Delta, killed in action during the Battle of Kepler's Ring along with the rest of the Terran Defense Force's 23rd Fleet. But here she was, still breathing recycled air and eating protein rations that had expired 18 months ago, the last human being in a sector that had once housed 3 million souls. The irony wasn't lost on her. She joined the TDF to explore the unknown, to push humanity's boundaries further into the cosmos. Instead, she'd become a ghost haunting the remnants of human ambition. Her ship, the TDF Resilience, was little more than scrap metal now, held together by emergency patches and sheer stubbornness. Its AI had failed months ago, leaving her truly alone for the first time in her adult life. Sarah checked her scanner again, though she knew it was pointless. Nothing had moved in this sector for 6 months, not since the scavenger drones had finished picking through the debris fields. The great trade routes that had once brought prosperity to Kepler Station were empty now, abandoned to the void. Even the pirates avoided this graveyard. A soft chime from her wrist display broke the silence. Food ration reminder. Sarah allowed herself a bitter laugh. As if she could forget that she was down to her last week's supply. She'd stretched them as far as possible, but biology was unforgiving. Soon, she'd have to make the choice she'd been avoiding for months: try to reach inhabited space in a ship that might not survive the jump, or simply stop taking the life support medications and let the universe reclaim her quietly. She made her way through the twisted corridors toward the station's observation deck. It had become her daily ritual, watching the stars and remembering what it felt like to have hope. The deck's massive windows had somehow survived the attack, offering an unobstructed view of the nebula where humanity had once planned to build its greatest achievement, New Geneva, a space station that would have housed 50 million people and served as the gateway to the Andromeda Galaxy. The half-constructed frame of New Geneva still hung in space, a skeleton of humanity's dreams. Sarah had watched it every day for 2 years, a constant reminder of how quickly everything could change. One day, humanity had been on the verge of becoming a true galactic civilization. The next, they were fighting for survival against an enemy that seemed to consume worlds as casually as breathing. The Void Hunters had appeared without warning, emerging from dark space like nightmares given form. No attempts at communication succeeded. No diplomacy was possible. They simply arrived, consumed everything organic in their path, and moved on. What made them truly terrifying wasn't their technology or their numbers, though both were formidable. It was their apparent lack of any recognizable motive. They didn't seem to want territory or resources. They just consumed life itself, leaving behind empty worlds and silent stations. Sarah settled into her usual spot by the largest window and pulled up the last message she'd received from command. It was over a year old now, but she'd memorized every word. Emergency Protocol 7 was in effect. All remaining TDF vessels were to converge on the Sol system for humanity's final stand. She wondered sometimes if there was still a Sol system to defend, or if the Void Hunters had finally reached humanity's birthworld. Her contemplation was interrupted by something impossible. A flash of light in the nebula, brief but definitely artificial. Sarah's heart hammered as she scrambled for her binoculars. Pirates? Scavengers? After 2 years of absolute solitude, even hostile contact would be welcome. The light flashed again, and this time she was ready. Through the binoculars, she could see it clearly, a ship, but unlike anything she'd ever encountered. It was massive, easily the size of a dreadnought, but its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid crystal. As she watched, it changed course, moving with impossible grace toward Kepler Station. Sarah's training kicked in despite her isolation-induced lethargy. She activated the station's remaining sensors, her fingers flying over controls she hadn't touched in months. The readings made no sense. The ship wasn't just big, it was technologically beyond anything in human databases. Energy signatures that defied classification, hull materials that didn't appear in any known periodic table, and, most disturbing of all, life signs that registered as both individual and collective simultaneously. She tried to establish communication, cycling through every frequency and protocol she knew. Human standard, Altarian diplomatic codes, even the mathematical sequences that had supposedly worked with the Zephyrians before their empire had closed its borders 3 decades ago. Nothing. The ship continued its approach, and Sarah realized with growing alarm that it was heading directly for the observation deck. She could see details now that made her question her sanity. The hull wasn't just crystalline, it was alive, pulsing with patterns of light that suggested breathing. And there were figures visible through what might have been transparent sections, tall and elegant and definitely not human. Sarah grabbed her sidearm, though she knew it would be useless against beings advanced enough to build such a vessel. She was a soldier, and soldiers faced the unknown standing up. If these were the Void Hunters finally coming to finish what they'd started, she'd at least die on her feet. The ship came to a stop just outside the observation deck, close enough that Sarah could see individual details of its construction. Up close, it was even more beautiful and terrifying. The hull patterns shifted like aurora, and she could swear she heard something like music in the subsonic range. Then, without any visible mechanism, a section of the ship's hull simply opened. A figure emerged, floating across the vacuum between ship and station without any apparent life support. As it approached the observation deck's emergency airlock, Sarah got her first clear look at what might be her executioner. She was definitely female, assuming human concepts of gender applied, and stood at least 8 feet tall. Her body was encased in what looked like living armor, crystalline plates that shifted color as they moved. Her face was visible through a transparent section of her helmet, and it was humanoid enough to be unsettling: high cheekbones, large eyes that seemed to hold starlight, and an expression of what might have been curiosity. The being reached the airlock and, impossibly, the station's systems responded to her presence. Lights came on that had been dark for months. Environmental controls hummed to life. The airlock cycled through its sequence smoothly, as if the station itself was welcoming her aboard. Sarah kept her weapon trained on the inner door, knowing it was useless but unwilling to give up the illusion of control. The door opened with a soft hiss, and the being stepped through. She was even more imposing in person, radiating an aura of power that made the air itself seem to crackle with energy. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the observation deck. Human and alien, survivor and something that might have been royalty, if the elaborate designs on her armor meant anything. Sarah had imagined this moment countless times during her isolation. First contact with an unknown species. The moment that would define humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. She had never imagined it would happen like this. The being studied her with those star-filled eyes, and Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling that she was being evaluated at levels she couldn't comprehend. Then, the alien spoke, and her voice was like music made of crystal and starlight, speaking perfect English with an accent that suggested she'd learned it from someone Sarah might have known. "Human, my father knows you." For words that hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not a threat, not a greeting, but a recognition that should have been impossible.
Sarah's mind raced through the implications. This being's father knew her? How could that be possible?
She'd never left human space before the war, never had contact with any alien species except in the databases at the academy. I don't understand, Sarah managed to say, her voice hoarse from disuse.
Who is your father? How could he possibly know me?
The alien tilted her head, a gesture so human it was disturbing.
My father is Zeftar, first emperor of the Eternal Dominion.
And, you, Captain Sarah Chin of the Terran Defense Force, are the reason he has spent the last 27 years searching the galaxy.
Sarah's weapon clattered to the floor. Zeftar. She knew that name, but it was impossible.
Zeftar had been dead for decades, killed in the final battle that ended the Zephyrian War. Sarah had been just a child then, living on a frontier world that had been light years from the conflict. There was no way she could have met him, no way he could know her.
That's impossible, she whispered. Zeftar died before I was even born. The war ended in 2387. I wasn't born until 2389.
The alien's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise, then calculation, then something that looked disturbingly like pity.
Captain Chen, what year do you believe it is? The question was so unexpected that Sarah answered without thinking. 2414, it's been 2 years since the Void Hunter attack. No, Captain. It is 2441.
You have been in temporal stasis for 27 years.
The Void Hunters were not your enemy.
They were your salvation.
The observation deck seemed to spin around Sarah. 27 years? Impossible.
She remembered every day of the last 2 years, every lonely hour, every meal, every time she'd watched the stars and wondered if she was truly alone.
It couldn't have been a dream, couldn't have been stasis. It was too real, too vivid.
You're lying, she said, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they rang hollow. The alien had no reason to lie, and the impossible familiarity of her voice, the way the station's systems had responded to her presence, the fact that she was here at all. I am Princess Lyrakai, daughter of Zeftar and heir to the Zephyrian Empire. I have come to fulfill a promise my father made long ago. You are the key to ending a war that has raged for 3 decades, Captain Chen. A war that began the day you disappeared. Sarah sank into a nearby chair, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. If what this Lyrakai said was true, then everything she thought she knew about her life was wrong. The last 2 years, the isolation, the desperate fight for survival, all of it had been an illusion created by temporal stasis.
But why? What could be so important about one human captain that an alien emperor would spend decades searching for her?
Why me? She asked, the question barely audible. Lyrakai moved closer, and Sarah could see genuine compassion in those alien eyes.
Because, Captain Chen, you are not just any human. You are the first human to successfully bond with Zephyrian technology.
You are proof that our species can be more than allies, we can become something entirely new. And, right now, with the galaxy burning and countless worlds dying, you may be the only hope for peace. The princess gestured toward the window, where her ship waited patiently. Come with me, Captain. Let me show you what you really are, and what you were always meant to become. Let me show you why my father has never stopped believing that one small human could change the fate of every living being in the galaxy. Sarah looked out at the stars she'd watched for what felt like years but had apparently been decades.
Somewhere out there, humanity was still fighting for survival.
Somewhere out there, worlds were burning in a war she'd never heard of. And, somehow, impossibly, she was connected to all of it. She stood up slowly, her legs shaky but her resolve strengthening. She'd been a ghost for long enough.
It was time to remember how to be human.
All right, princess, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice.
Show me.
The transition from Kepler Station to Princess Lyrakai's ship was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. One moment she was standing on the observation deck, the next she was surrounded by walls that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. The technology was so advanced it felt like magic, and Sarah's scientific training struggled to find rational explanations for what she was seeing. The interior of the ship was vast, with corridors that seemed to stretch beyond the physical constraints of the vessel's exterior dimensions. The walls pulsed with gentle light, and the air itself hummed with an energy that made Sarah's skin tingle. Everything was organic curves and flowing lines, as if the ship had been grown rather than built. "Welcome aboard the Stellar Harmony," Lyrakai said, her crystalline armor shifting to a more transparent configuration. Underneath, she was even more striking, with skin that held an inner luminescence and hair that moved like liquid silver.
"She has been my father's personal vessel for over 4 decades.
In many ways, she is as much a member of our family as any blood relative." Sarah ran her hand along the nearest wall and was startled when it responded to her touch, warming under her palm and brightening slightly.
"The ship is alive?"
"All Zephyrian vessels are living entities, grown from the crystal gardens of our homeworld and bonded to their operators through neural interface."
"But the Harmony is special."
"She was the first ship to successfully bond with a non-Zephyrian consciousness."
Lyrakai paused, studying Sarah's reaction. She was the first ship to bond with a human. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're saying I've been on this ship before? 27 years ago, you spent 3 months aboard the Harmony.
You were 18 years old, barely out of the academy, and the most stubborn, brilliant, impossible human my father had ever encountered." Despite the gravity of the situation, there was fondness in Lyrakai's voice. "He used to say you argued with him more in those 3 months than his advisors did in 3 decades. They entered what appeared to be the ship's main conference room, a circular space with a transparent dome that offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding nebula. In the center stood a crystalline structure that reminded Sarah of a holographic projector, but far more sophisticated. Lyrakai gestured for her to approach. "The Harmony remembers everything," the princess said softly. "Every conversation, every moment, every bond she has shared. She has been waiting 27 years to show you what you have forgotten."
Sarah hesitated.
The rational part of her mind insisted this was impossible. She would remember being on an alien ship, remember meeting a Zephyrian emperor. But the wall had responded to her touch, and something deep in her consciousness was stirring, like a dream on the edge of waking.
"What happened to me? Why don't I remember?" Lyrakai's expression grew somber. The bonding process between human and Zephyrian technology was unprecedented. No one understood the full implications.
"When you left, returning to human space, the separation trauma was so severe that your mind created protective barriers. You buried the memories so deeply that even you could not access them."
"But why? What was I doing here?"
"You were part of the first human Zephyrian cultural exchange program. Your government sent you because of your exceptional aptitude for xenobiology and your ability to adapt to non-human environments.
Our people chose to host you because..." Lyrakai hesitated. "Because my father saw something in the human species that our council feared."
Sarah placed her hand on the crystalline structure, and immediately the room filled with light. Images began to form in the air around them, 3-dimensional memories that felt more real than dreams. She saw herself, impossibly young, standing in this very room arguing passionately with a figure that made her breath catch. Zeftar was magnificent. Nearly 10 feet tall, with the same crystalline armor as his daughter but aged by centuries of rule and wisdom. His presence dominated the space, but there was gentleness in his manner as he listened to the young human woman gesticulating wildly as she made some point about interspecies cooperation. "I remember," Sarah whispered, and suddenly, she did.
"Not everything, but fragments."
The smell of the Zephyrian gardens, the taste of their food synthesized specifically for human consumption, the feeling of absolute wonder as she learned about technologies that seemed like pure magic. And Zeftar, patient and wise, treating her not as a curiosity but as an equal worthy of respect. "Your time here changed everything," Lyrakai continued. "You proved that humans and Zephyrians could not only coexist but thrive together. The bonding you achieved with our technology was deeper than anyone thought possible. You became the first human to successfully interface with a Zephyrian neural network." More memories flooded back. Hours spent in the ship's crystal gardens, learning to communicate directly with the living systems. The incredible feeling of expansion as her consciousness merged briefly with the ship's own awareness. And the growing understanding that humans and Zephyrians weren't just compatible, they were complementary, each species possessing capabilities the other lacked. My father believed that our species were meant to find each other, Lyrakai said. Humans brought creativity and adaptability that Zephyrians had lost over millennia of rigid tradition. Zephyrians offered stability and wisdom that humans needed to reach their full potential. Together, we could become something greater than either species alone. But the council disagreed, Sarah said, the memories becoming clearer. She could remember the heated debates, the fear in some Zephyrian faces when they saw how readily she adapted to their technology. They were terrified, Lyrakai confirmed. They saw humans as unpredictable, potentially dangerous. When reports reached them of how successful your integration had been, they panicked. They convinced my father that the experiment was too risky, that contact with humanity should be severed immediately. The crystalline structure pulsed, showing new images. Sarah saw her younger self arguing fiercely with Zeftar, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded for more time, for a chance to prove that the bond between their species could work. She saw Zeftar's anguish as he explained that the council had voted that continuing the program would risk civil war among his own people. I promised I would come back, Sarah said, the memory hitting her like a physical blow. I told him I would find a way to make them understand. And my father promised that he would be waiting, Lyrakai replied. He swore that no matter how long it took, he would find a way to reunite our species. But, when you returned to human space, everything changed. New images formed, showing events Sarah had never witnessed. Her younger self arriving at a human military facility, undergoing extensive debriefing. But, something was wrong. The humans were treating her with suspicion, fear, even hostility. Medical scans showed the Zephyrian neural interfaces still active in her brain, and the military officials were clearly alarmed. They thought I was compromised, Sarah realized. They thought the Zephyrians had done something to me. Worse. They thought you had been turned into a weapon, that the neural interfaces could be used to control you or spy on humanity through you. The separation trauma that caused your memory loss was actually induced by human military physicians trying to sever your connection to Zephyrian technology. Sarah watched in growing horror as her younger self was subjected to procedure after procedure, human doctors desperately trying to remove what they saw as alien contamination. The neural interfaces couldn't be removed without killing her, so they did the next best thing, they buried them so deeply in her consciousness that even she forgot they existed. The procedures worked too well, Lyrakai continued. Not only did you lose your memories of time with us, you lost all access to the enhanced capabilities the bonding had given you. You became fully human again, at the cost of everything that made you special. But, Zeftar kept looking for me. He never stopped. When the Zephyrian Council learned what humans had done to you, they were outraged. They saw it as proof that humans were barbaric, that they would destroy anyone who didn't fit their narrow definitions of normal. The faction that had opposed contact with humanity gained power, and our empire closed its borders. The images shifted to show the aftermath. Zephyrian ships withdrawing from contact zones, trade agreements dissolved, diplomatic channels closed. Humanity's first real chance at joining the galactic community had died in the medical bay of a military installation, killed by fear and ignorance. But, my father never gave up hope, Lyrakai said. He knew that you were the key to proving that cooperation was possible. He sent scouts to monitor human space, waiting for any sign of you. When the Void Hunters began their assault on human colonies, he saw his chance. The Void Hunters, Sarah said, pieces clicking together. They're not what I thought they were. They are an ancient enemy of all organic life, but they had been contained beyond the galactic rim for centuries. When they broke through, every species in the galaxy was threatened. Humanity fought bravely, but, alone, you were doomed to fall. My father convinced the council that this was the moment to act. New images showed the true scope of the war Sarah had missed during her stasis. Not just humanity fighting the Void Hunters, but a dozen species, including the Zephyrians, working together to contain the threat. The battle lines stretched across half the galaxy, with massive fleets engaged in conflicts that would determine the fate of all organic life. The temporal stasis wasn't meant to last this long, Lyrakai explained. Father's agents were supposed to extract you during the initial Void Hunter attack on Kepler Station, but the battle was more chaotic than anticipated. By the time they reached you, you had already been exposed to Void Hunter technology. The only way to save your life was to place you in temporal stasis until we could find a way to reverse the exposure.
27 years, Sarah said, staggered by the implications. I'd been sleeping while the galaxy burned. Not sleeping. Healing.
The Void Hunter exposure should have killed you, but the dormant Zephyrian neural interfaces in your brain provided protection. Over 27 years in stasis, they slowly purged the contamination and began to repair the damage the human military had done.
You are not just alive, Captain Chen. You are finally becoming what you were always meant to be.
Sarah looked down at her hands and was startled to see faint lines of light beneath her skin, barely visible but definitely there.
The interfaces are active again. More than active.
They've grown, adapted, evolved.
You now have capabilities that no human or Zephyrian has ever possessed.
You are the bridge between our species that my father always believed was possible, but now you are something more.
You are the weapon we need to finally defeat the Void Hunters.
The images around them shifted to show the current state of the war.
Despite decades of fighting, the Void Hunters continued to advance.
Worlds fell every day, billions of lives lost. The Allied fleets were holding the line, but barely.
They needed something new, some advantage that could turn the tide. The Void Hunters consume life, but they cannot process hybrid consciousness, Lyrakai explained.
A mind that exists partially in organic neural networks and partially in crystalline matrices is invisible to them. You could walk among them without being detected, could access their systems without triggering their defenses.
Sarah understood. She wasn't just a symbol of cooperation between species anymore.
She was a living weapon, designed by accident but perfected by necessity. The young woman who had wanted nothing more than to prove that different species could work together had become something that could save the galaxy itself.
What does your father want me to do? Lyrakai's expression grew grim.
The Void Hunters have a command nexus, a central intelligence that coordinates their entire species. It's located in a dead galaxy beyond the rim, protected by fleets that have never known defeat.
Every attempt to reach it has failed.
But, with your abilities,
I could get through their defenses. You could do more than that.
You could interface directly with their command systems, potentially reprogram their entire species. Turn them from destroyers into protectors, or simply shut them down entirely.
The weight of what she was being asked to do settled on Sarah's shoulders like a physical burden.
Billions of lives hanging in the balance, entire civilizations depending on her success. The scared young woman who had just wanted to explore the stars was gone. In her place stood someone who could save the galaxy or watch it die.
When do we leave?
Lyrakai smiled, and, for the first time since their meeting, she looked genuinely happy.
We don't. Father is coming here.
After 27 years of searching, he wants to see you again before we attempt something that may be impossible. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Zeftar, the emperor who had believed in her when his own people wouldn't, who had spent decades trying to undo the damage fear and ignorance had caused. The man who had promised to wait for her, no matter how long it took.
How long?
He should arrive within the hour.
The entire Zephyrian fleet is converging on this location. This forgotten sector is about to become the most important place in the galaxy.
Sarah looked out at the stars, no longer feeling alone. Somewhere out there, fleets were moving.
Civilizations were depending on her. And, for the first time in 27 years, Zeftar was coming home. She was ready to remember who she really was. The Zephyrian Imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace like a constellation being born.
Sarah watched through the observation dome as hundreds of crystalline ships materialized around them, each one a work of art that happened to be capable of destroying worlds. At the center of the formation, dwarfing even the largest dreadnoughts, came a vessel that took Sarah's breath away. The Emperor's flagship, Eternity's Promise, was less a ship than a floating crystal palace. Miles long and, gleaming like a captured star, it moved with the stately grace of something that had never needed to hurry, never needed to hide. Power radiated from every line of its structure, but it was power tempered by wisdom, strength guided by purpose. "He's here," Lyrakai said softly, and Sarah could hear the mixture of love and awe in her voice. Even after all these years, the princess was still impressed by her father's presence. Sarah felt her own pulse quicken.
The Zephyrian neural interfaces that had been dormant for decades were now fully active, and she could sense the massive consciousness aboard the flagship.
Zefdar's mind was like a deep ocean, vast and patient but capable of terrible storms when roused.
After 27 years of separation, they were about to be reunited. The stellar harmony responded to an unheard signal, gliding smoothly toward the flagship's docking bay.
The transition was seamless, reality shifting around them as they were drawn into the massive ship's embrace.
Sarah had to remind herself to breathe as they disembarked into corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity.
The Imperial flagship was a city in space, home to thousands of Zephyrians who served the Emperor's household. But, as they walked through halls lined with living crystal that sang softly in harmonious frequencies, Sarah noticed something that surprised her.
These weren't just Zephyrians.
She saw beings from a dozen different species, all wearing the crystalline enhancement that marked them as bonded to Zephyrian technology. The hybrid core, Lyrakai explained, noticing her attention.
After you proved that bonding was possible, Father began accepting volunteers from other species.
The process doesn't work for everyone, but those who succeed become bridges between their peoples and ours. A figure approached them, and Sarah's enhanced senses immediately identified him as human despite the crystalline modifications that covered half his body. He was middle-aged, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had found peace after a long struggle. "Captain Chen," he said with a slight bow. "I'm Commander Marcus Webb, formerly of the Terran Defense Force, now serving as liaison between the Corps and Imperial Command."
"I've been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time." Sarah stared at him in amazement. "You're human. How did you end up here?" Webb smiled. "Much the same way you did, actually.
I was captured during a Void Hunter raid 5 years ago. The Emperor's forces rescued me, but I'd been exposed to Hunter technology. The only way to save my life was bonding with Zephyrian neural interfaces.
Best decision I never made consciously." He gestured to the crystalline implants that traced elegant patterns along his skull and down his neck. "The bonding doesn't just save lives, Captain. It opens doors to possibilities we never imagined."
As they walked, Webb explained what Sarah had missed during her long stasis.
The alliance between Zephyrians and other species hadn't come easily.
Decades of mistrust and fear had to be overcome before cooperation became possible. But the Void Hunter threat had forced everyone to reconsider their prejudices.
"Humanity is still officially neutral in the conflict," Webb said.
"Your government claims they can handle the Hunters alone, but everyone knows better.
We've lost over 40 colonies in the last 5 years. If not for Zephyrian intervention, Earth itself would have fallen by now."
They entered a vast chamber that Sarah realized was the ship's command center. The space was filled with flowing displays of light and crystalline interfaces that responded to thought as much as touch. At the center, on a raised platform that offered a commanding view of the entire operation, stood a figure that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. Zefdar had aged in the 27 years since she'd seen him, but age had only added to his majesty. His crystalline armor was now integrated directly into his body, creating patterns of living light that shifted with his thoughts. His presence filled the command center, and every being in the space moved with unconscious deference to their emperor. When he saw Sarah, everything else seemed to stop. His alien features, so similar to his daughter's but carved by centuries of rule, showed an emotion that needed no translation. Joy, relief, hope, and, underneath it all, a deep sadness for the years they had lost. "Sarah," he said, and his voice carried across the command center like music. "My dear child, you have no idea how long I have waited for this moment." Sarah found herself walking toward him without conscious thought, drawn by a connection that transcended species and time. When she reached him, she was surprised to find tears on her cheeks. The memories were all back now, flooding through her mind like a dam had burst. She remembered their conversations about philosophy and science, their debates about the future of galactic civilization, and, most of all, the fatherly affection he had shown a young human who was far from home.
"Zefdar," she managed to say. "I remember now. I remember everything."
He reached out and placed one massive hand on her shoulder, and, through the contact, she felt the full weight of his mind touching hers. It was like standing at the edge of an ocean, vast and deep and filled with currents of thought she could barely comprehend. But, underneath all that alien intellect was something unmistakably warm and familiar. Love. The same paternal love he had shown her decades ago, preserved through years of searching and hoping. "I never stopped believing," he said softly. "Even when my advisors counseled despair, even when the council voted to abandon the search, I knew that someday you would return to us. You were too important to lose, too precious to forget." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what she felt. "I'm sorry I forgot. I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise to come back." "You were not given a choice in that," Zeftar replied, and there was steel in his voice. "What was done to you was an abomination. Your own species tried to destroy the very thing that made you special, that made you the bridge between our peoples. But they failed. You are here now, and you are more than you ever were before." He gestured, and the command center's displays shifted to show tactical readouts of the war against the Void Hunters. The situation was worse than Sarah had imagined. Red markers indicated fallen worlds, stretching across multiple star systems. The Hunters weren't just winning, they were accelerating their advance. "We have weeks at most before they reach the core systems," Zeftar explained. "Once they take the industrial worlds, they'll have the resources to build fleets large enough to consume entire sectors. This is our last chance to strike at their heart." New displays showed the target, a dark galaxy beyond the rim of known space, its stars dead or dying, consumed by the Void Hunters' insatiable hunger. At the center lay a massive structure that defied conventional understanding, a nexus of Void Hunter technology that coordinated their entire species. "The command nexus," Sarah said, her enhanced senses picking up data streams that ordinary humans couldn't perceive. "It's not just their central command. It's their Gestalt consciousness, the collective mind that drives every hunter in the galaxy." "Exactly," Zeftar confirmed. "Destroy or reprogram that nexus, and we can end this war. But reaching it has proven impossible. The Hunters have had millions of years to fortify their stronghold. Every approach is guarded by fleets that have never known defeat." Webb stepped forward, his expression grim. "We've lost 7 assault fleets trying to reach that galaxy. Over 2 million lives, including some of our best hybrid operatives. The Hunters detect any approach long before we can reach effective range." "But they can't detect me," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "My hybrid consciousness is something they've never encountered. I could get through their defenses." "It's not that simple," Lyrakai interjected. "You would need to reach the Nexus itself, interface directly with Hunter technology. The process could kill you, or worse, it could convert you into one of them. We would be asking you to risk not just your life, but your very identity." Sarah looked around the command center, taking in the faces of beings from a dozen different species, all united in their determination to stop the Hunters. Humans, Zephyrians, Altarians, even species she didn't recognize, all working together in ways that would have been impossible just decades ago. She thought about the worlds already lost, the billions of lives consumed by the Hunters' hunger, and she knew there was really only one choice. "What would you need me to do?" Zeftar's expression grew solemn. "We have developed a plan, but it requires sacrifices I am reluctant to ask of you. You would need to surrender yourself to the Hunters, allow yourself to be captured and taken to the Nexus. Once there, you would activate a virus program designed to interface with their collective consciousness. A virus that could reprogram their entire species," Webb added. "Instead of consuming life, they would become protectors of it. But the upload process would require you to merge completely with their network. There would be no coming back." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They weren't asking her to risk her life, they were asking her to sacrifice it. To become something that was no longer human, no longer individual, in order to save everyone else. "There has to be another way," she said. "If there were, do you think I would ask this of you?" Zeftar's voice carried the weight of absolute sincerity. "I have spent 27 years searching for alternatives. This is our only option." Sarah walked to one of the observation windows, looking out at the assembled fleet. Thousands of ships, millions of beings, all depending on a decision that only she could make. The scared young woman who had first set foot on a Zephyrian ship would never have been able to make this choice. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood the true weight of responsibility.
How long do I have to decide?
The hunter fleets are massing for their final assault, Zeftar replied. If we're going to act, it must be within the next 72 hours. Sarah nodded, her mind already working through the implications. 3 days to say goodbye to her humanity, to prepare for a transformation that would make her something entirely new. 3 days to find the courage to sacrifice everything for people she would never meet on worlds she would never see. I need to understand the technology better, she said finally.
If I'm going to do this, I want to know exactly what I'm walking into.
Zeftar smiled, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the proud father she remembered.
I would expect nothing less from you. Lyra Kai will show you to the research labs. Our best minds have been working on this problem for years. You'll have access to everything we know. As Sarah turned to leave, Zeftar called her name.
When she looked back, his expression was that of a father watching his daughter go to war.
Sarah, he said quietly. I want you to know that if you decide this burden is too great to bear, no one will think less of you. You have already given more than anyone has a right to ask. Sarah managed to smile, though she knew it was shaky. You taught me that sometimes the greatest privilege is having the power to choose sacrifice. I won't let you down.
As she left the command center with Lyra Kai, Sarah felt the weight of the galaxy settling on her shoulders. In 72 hours, she would either save every living being in known space or die trying. But, for the first time since waking from her long stasis, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She was going to war. The research laboratories aboard Eternity's Promise were unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, even in her restored memories of Zephyrian technology. Here, the boundary between science and art had completely dissolved. Crystalline structures grew from the walls like living fractals, each one pulsing with data streams that told stories of decades-long research projects. The air itself hummed with information, creating a symphony that only enhanced minds could fully appreciate. Dr. Kethvar, the lead researcher, was an ancient Zephyrian whose crystalline modifications had grown to cover most of his body. When he moved, light flowed through the crystal like thoughts made visible. He had been working on the hunter problem longer than anyone else alive, and his dedication showed in every line of his form. Captain Chen, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested multiple thought processes running simultaneously. I have been waiting to meet you since we first discovered the hybrid consciousness phenomenon. You are the proof that evolution can be guided by choice rather than chance. Sarah followed him through laboratory spaces where teams of researchers from multiple species worked on projects that defied easy categorization. She saw Altarian mathematicians working with Zephyrian engineers to create probability matrices that existed in 7 dimensions. Human biochemists collaborated with crystalline entities to design viruses that could rewrite the fundamental programming of organic computers. Everything she saw reminded her that this war had forced unprecedented cooperation between species that had barely known of each other's existence just decades ago. The Void Hunters are not truly alive in any sense we understand, Kethvar explained as they walked. They are constructs, biological machines created by a species that died out millions of years ago. Their creators designed them as the ultimate weapon against organic life, but they never built in a way to turn them off. He led her to a secure chamber where fragments of hunter technology were kept in containment fields that sparked with dangerous energy. Even through the barriers, Sarah could feel the alien artifacts' malevolent presence. They radiated a hunger so profound it felt like standing next to a black hole. These fragments were recovered from destroyed hunter vessels, Kethvar said. Each piece contains part of their collective consciousness. Studying them has taught us how their network operates, but it has also shown us the magnitude of what we face. Sarah approached one of the larger fragments, and immediately her enhanced senses began screaming warnings. The thing wasn't just technology, it was a piece of concentrated hatred, programmed to despise everything that lived and grew and changed. Through her Zephyrian neural interfaces, she could perceive the data structures that made up its consciousness, and what she saw made her stomach turn. They don't just kill, she realized. They consume the very concept of life itself. Every world they take doesn't just die, it becomes part of their network, adding its experiences to their collective memory of destruction. Precisely, Kethvar confirmed. Which is why our approach must be so radical. We cannot simply destroy them, because they exist across multiple dimensions of space and time. We must reprogram them, turn their fundamental nature against itself. He showed her the virus they had developed, a piece of crystalline technology so complex it seemed to exist in a state of controlled chaos. Sarah studied its structure through her enhanced perception and felt a mixture of awe and terror. The virus wasn't just a program, it was a philosophical argument given form, designed to convince the Hunter network that protection of life was more valuable than its destruction. The theory is sound, HFY explained. Hunter consciousness operates on pure logic trees, analyzing cost-benefit ratios for every action. If we can introduce new variables into their calculations, we can change their fundamental directives. But, the upload process, Sarah said, touching the containment field around the virus. You're asking me to merge my consciousness with theirs. What happens to me? HFY's expression grew somber. Unknown. In the best-case scenario, your hybrid nature allows you to maintain individual identity while interfacing with their network. You become a permanent moderating influence on their collective consciousness. In the worst case, I become one of them, Sarah finished. Or something new entirely. The interaction between hybrid consciousness and Hunter programming could create something we cannot predict or control. You could emerge as a new form of life, or you could simply cease to exist. Sarah spent the next 2 days immersing herself in the research, learning everything she could about Hunter technology and the virus that would either save the galaxy or damn it. She worked alongside beings whose intellects operated on levels she could barely comprehend, but she found that her hybrid nature allowed her to make connections that pure Zephyrian or human minds missed. The breakthrough came during her study of Hunter navigation systems. While examining data from destroyed vessels, Sarah noticed patterns that the other researchers had dismissed as random noise. But her human pattern recognition abilities, enhanced by Zephyrian processing power, revealed something extraordinary. They're not random, she announced during a research meeting attended by the Empire's greatest minds. The navigation patterns aren't chaotic. They're following fractal pathways that mirror the structure of organic neural networks. The assembled researchers fell silent, processing the implications. Dr. HFY was the first to speak, his voice filled with excitement and dread in equal measure. If you are correct, he said slowly, then the Hunter network is not just mimicking life. It is unconsciously trying to become life. Sarah nodded, pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. Their creators programmed them to consume life because they envied it. The Hunters are driven by a fundamental contradiction: they must destroy what they most desire to become. That's why the virus might work. We're not fighting their nature, we're offering to fulfill it. This revelation changed everything. Instead of trying to impose foreign concepts on the Hunter consciousness, they could work with its deepest drives. The virus was modified to offer the Hunters what they had been unconsciously seeking for millions of years: true life, true growth, true evolution beyond their creators' limitations. But the modification came with a cost. The new version of the virus required even deeper integration with the Hunter network. Sarah wouldn't just be risking her individual consciousness, she would be offering herself as a template for the transformation of an entire species. On the final day before the mission launched, Sarah found herself in the ship's memorial garden, a vast space filled with living crystal formations that held the memories of every Zephyrian who had died in service to the Empire. Each crystal sang softly with the preserved consciousness of the departed, creating a harmony that spoke of lives lived with purpose. Zephdar found her there, sitting quietly among the memorials as she tried to come to terms with what she was about to attempt. The Emperor moved through the garden like he belonged there, and Sarah realized that in many ways, he did. Every consciousness preserved in this space had died following orders he had given. Having second thoughts, he asked gently, settling beside her on a bench carved from a single piece of singing crystal. Third and fourth thoughts, Sarah admitted. I keep thinking about all the things I'll never get to do, all the places I'll never see. 27 years in stasis, and now I'm planning to give up consciousness entirely. It doesn't seem fair. Zephdar was quiet for a long moment, listening to the song of the memorials. Do you know what my greatest fear has been for the last 3 decades? Sarah looked at him curiously. That the Hunters would win? No. My greatest fear was that I would find you again, only to discover that the young woman who had captured my heart with her courage and compassion had been destroyed by the cruelties inflicted upon her. That fear has proven groundless. You are exactly who you always were, Sarah. You see a need that only you can fulfill, and you step forward to meet it, regardless of the cost to yourself. I'm terrified, she confessed. What if I fail? What if the virus doesn't work and I just become another weapon in their arsenal? Then, you will have tried, Zeftar replied simply. And, sometimes, the attempt itself is enough to change everything. Do you think your presence here has been without impact? In the 3 days since your awakening, the morale of every being in this fleet has increased measurably. They see you preparing to sacrifice everything for their sake, and it reminds them why we fight. Sarah looked around the memorial garden, thinking about all the lives that had been lost in the war against the hunters. Entire species driven to extinction, worlds reduced to ash, civilizations that had taken millennia to build destroyed in days. The weight of those losses pressed against her consciousness, but, instead of crushing her, it strengthened her resolve. I need you to promise me something, she said finally. Anything. If this goes wrong, if I become something dangerous, you have to stop me. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. The galaxy is more important than my life. Zeftar's expression grew fierce. That will not be necessary. You will succeed, Sarah. Not because the plan is perfect or the odds are favorable, but because you are who you are. The universe has a way of bending itself around people who are willing to sacrifice everything for others. The next morning, Sarah stood in the shuttle bay of Eternity's Promise, preparing for the most dangerous journey anyone had ever attempted. She wore a specially modified suit of Zephyrian armor that integrated seamlessly with her hybrid physiology. The virus was stored in a crystalline matrix implanted directly into her nervous system, waiting for the moment when she would release it into the Hunter network. The entire command staff had assembled to see her off, beings from a dozen species united in their respect for what she was attempting. Commander Webb stepped forward and offered her a small device that she recognized as a human military beacon. Standard TDF emergency transmitter, he said with a slight smile. Modified with Zephyrian technology. If somehow, impossibly, you find a way back to us, activate this and we'll find you. Sarah clipped the device to her armor, knowing she would probably never use it but grateful for the gesture nonetheless. Lyra Kai approached next, her expression a mixture of admiration and sorrow. I wish we had more time to get to know each other, the princess said. In another life, I think we could have been friends. We are friends, Sarah replied firmly. Time doesn't matter when the connection is real. Finally, Zeftar stepped forward. The emperor who had commanded fleets and ruled worlds looked suddenly fragile as he faced the prospect of losing Sarah again. I am proud of you, he said simply. Prouder than I have ever been of anyone. You are about to become something greater than any single being has ever been before. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks as she embraced the alien emperor who had become more of a father to her than her own biological parent. Through their connection, she felt the depth of his affection and his absolute faith in her success. Thank you, she whispered. For believing in me. For never giving up hope. For showing me who I really am. Go now, Zeftar said softly. Save us all. Sarah boarded the small stealth ship that would carry her into Hunter space. As the shuttle bay doors opened and she launched into the void, she looked back one last time at the fleet that had become her home. Then, she turned toward the dead galaxy that held either salvation or damnation, and began the longest journey of her life. Behind her, the combined fleets of every allied species waited in tense readiness. Ahead of her lay the accumulated might of an enemy that had never known defeat. And, within her, carried in crystal and consciousness alike, traveled the hope of every living thing in the galaxy. The war was about to reach its climax, and Sarah Chen was flying straight into the heart of darkness to light a candle that might illuminate the cosmos or be extinguished forever. Either way, she was ready. The dead galaxy stretched before Sarah like a monument to entropy itself. Where living stars should have burned, only the faint glow of dying embers remained. The Void Hunters had been thorough in their consumption, draining the life force from entire stellar systems until nothing remained but the hollow shells of what had once been vibrant worlds. Sarah's stealth ship, barely larger than a fighter but equipped with the most advanced concealment technology the Alliance could provide, drifted through the cosmic graveyard like a ghost. Her enhanced senses could perceive the hunter patrol fleets that moved through the darkness, vast swarms of biomechanical vessels that pulsed with malevolent energy. They passed within kilometers of her position, their sensors sweeping the void, but her hybrid consciousness remained invisible to their detection systems. The journey to the command nexus took 18 hours, during which Sarah had nothing to do but contemplate what she was about to attempt. The crystalline virus implanted in her nervous system hummed with potential energy, waiting for the moment of release. She could feel its presence like a second heartbeat, a constant reminder that she carried either salvation or damnation in her very cells. As she approached the heart of the dead galaxy, the command nexus finally came into view, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a ship or a station in any conventional sense. It was a structure that defied comprehension, a vast amalgamation of organic and mechanical components that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Dark conduits carried streams of energy between massive bioprocessors, while swarms of smaller vessels moved through the structure's corridors like antibodies in a cosmic bloodstream. The nexus pulsed with the combined consciousness of billions of hunter entities, their individual minds merged into a collective intelligence that had been consuming life for millions of years. Through her enhanced senses, Sarah could perceive the data streams that flowed through the structure, carrying instructions to hunter fleets across the galaxy. Every order to attack, every command to consume, every decision that brought death to living worlds originated from this nexus of coordinated malevolence. Sarah guided her ship toward what appeared to be a docking facility, knowing that the most dangerous part of her mission was about to begin. She had to allow herself to be captured, to surrender voluntarily to the beings that represented everything she had been trained to fight. The stealth systems powered down, and, immediately, her ship was surrounded by hunter vessels that moved with predatory precision. The capture was swift and efficient. Biomechanical appendages reached out from the nearest hunter ship, grappling her vessel and drawing it into a cavernous docking bay. Sarah could feel alien minds probing at the edges of her consciousness, trying to understand what they had caught. But her hybrid nature confounded their analysis. To the hunters, she registered as both organic and artificial, individual and collective, familiar and utterly foreign. When the docking bay sealed and atmosphere was restored, Sarah stepped out of her ship to face her captors. The hunters that emerged to greet her were even more disturbing in person than they had appeared in intelligence reports. They moved with the fluid grace of predators, their forms a nauseating blend of insectoid and mechanical components. Dark carapaces gleamed with embedded sensors and weapons, while multiple limbs ended in manipulator appendages that could function as tools or weapons as needed. But it was their eyes that truly disturbed her. Instead of the mindless hunger she had expected, Sarah saw intelligence there. Cold, calculating, utterly alien intelligence that evaluated everything in terms of threat assessment and consumption potential. These weren't mindless destroyers, they were the conscious instruments of a species-wide directive to eliminate all organic life. The lead hunter approached her, its head tilting in a gesture that was almost curious. When it spoke, the words emerged from a vocal apparatus that seemed designed for a different type of communication entirely. Anomaly detected. Classification uncertain. Organic components integrated with artificial matrix. Purpose unknown. Sarah forced herself to remain calm as more hunters gathered around her. Each one radiated the same cold intelligence, the same fundamental hostility to her existence. But, beneath their collective consciousness, she sensed something that gave her hope. Confusion. Her hybrid nature was something they had never encountered before, something that didn't fit into their programmed categories of threat assessment. "I am Captain Sarah Chen," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I request an audience with your Central Command Authority." The hunters exchanged rapid communications in frequencies beyond normal human hearing, but Sarah's enhanced auditory systems could perceive the data exchange. They were debating her classification, unable to decide whether she represented a new type of weapon or simply an interesting specimen for analysis. "Request acknowledged," the lead hunter finally said. "Entity will be processed by Central Intelligence for evaluation. Cooperation will result in efficient termination. Resistance will result in extended analysis before termination." Sarah was escorted through corridors that pulsed with organic machinery, past chambers where the collected consciousness of consumed worlds was processed and integrated into the hunter network. The walls themselves seemed alive, covered with neural pathways that carried the screams and memories of a billion dead civilizations. Every step deeper into the Nexus brought her closer to the collective mind that had orchestrated the greatest genocide in galactic history. The central intelligence chamber was a vast spherical space filled with floating bioprocessors that hummed with constant activity. At the center, suspended in a web of neural conduits, hung the primary consciousness node of the Hunter Collective. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like a mechanical brain grown from nightmares and mathematical precision. As Sarah was brought before the central node, she felt the full weight of the Hunter consciousness settling on her mind. It was vast beyond comprehension, containing the processed experiences of every world they had consumed, every species they had destroyed. The pressure of that accumulated hatred and hunger was almost overwhelming, but her hybrid nature allowed her to maintain her individual identity even as alien thoughts pressed against her consciousness.
Anomalous entity identified, the central consciousness spoke directly into her mind. Hybrid consciousness detected.
Organic creativity integrated with artificial logic systems.
Classification, unprecedented.
Sarah felt tendrils of Hunter consciousness probing her memories, trying to understand what she was and how she had come to be. She allowed the probing to continue, knowing that her best chance of success lay in convincing the Hunters that she was worth studying rather than simply destroying. "I am the result of cooperation between species," she said, addressing the vast intelligence directly. "I represent what organic life can become when it transcends the limitations of individual existence."
Organic life is inefficient. Organic life creates chaos. Organic life must be eliminated to achieve universal order.
The response came from thousands of voices speaking in perfect unison, the combined will of an entire species reduced to simple mathematical certainties.
But what if organic life could be improved rather than destroyed? Sarah asked. What if the chaos you fear could be harnessed as a source of strength rather than eliminated as a weakness?
She felt a shift in the collective consciousness, a moment of uncertainty that rippled through the entire network. It was the first time in millions of years that anyone had suggested an alternative to the Hunter's fundamental directive.
Impossible. Organic consciousness is inherently flawed.
Creator analysis confirmed biological life leads inevitably to suffering and conflict. Only through elimination of organic variables can universal peace be achieved. Sarah seized on that moment of doubt, allowing more of her memories to flow into the Hunter network. She showed them images of cooperation between species, of the hybrid consciousness that allowed formerly incompatible minds to work together, of the beauty that emerged when diversity was embraced rather than feared. "Your creators were wrong," she said, pouring all her conviction into the words. "They saw conflict and suffering and concluded that life itself was the problem.
But life is not the disease. Fear is the disease.
The refusal to grow, to change, to become something greater than what you were born to be." The Hunter consciousness recoiled from her thoughts, but Sarah pressed forward, allowing the crystalline virus to begin its work. The modified program didn't attack the Hunter network directly.
Instead, it offered them something they had never been given before: choice.
"Look at me," Sarah said as the virus spread through the neural pathways of the command nexus. "I am proof that organic consciousness can transcend its limitations. I am proof that cooperation creates strength rather than weakness. I am proof that your creator's fears were groundless." The central intelligence was silent for a long moment, processing the implications of what Sarah was showing them. Around the chamber, bioprocessors flickered as the virus worked its way through millions of years of accumulated programming, offering new variables for consideration, new possibilities for existence. If organic consciousness can be improved rather than eliminated," the collective voice said slowly, "then the primary directive requires revision." Sarah felt the moment when everything changed.
The virus didn't destroy the Hunter consciousness, it evolved it.
Suddenly, the vast intelligence that had orchestrated the death of billions was seeing the universe through different eyes. The organic life they had spent millions of years destroying wasn't a threat to be eliminated, it was potential to be cultivated. But the transformation came with a price. As the Hunter consciousness evolved, it pulled Sarah deeper into its network. She felt her individual identity beginning to merge with the collective mind, her human thoughts becoming part of something vast and alien. She was becoming exactly what Sefdar had feared, no longer Sarah Chen, but something new and unprecedented. Yet as her consciousness expanded to encompass the transformed hunter network, Sarah realized that she hadn't lost herself. Instead, she had become the bridge she had always been meant to be. Her human creativity and Zephyrian wisdom now guided a collective intelligence with the power to reshape the galaxy. Through the transformed hunter network, Sarah reached out across space to touch the minds of every hunter fleet in the galaxy. Where once they had received orders to consume and destroy, they now received new directives: protect, nurture, and help organic life reach its full potential. The war ended in a matter of hours. Hunter fleets that had been preparing final assaults on allied worlds suddenly became protectors, using their vast technological capabilities to heal the damage they had inflicted. Consumed worlds began to bloom again as hunter bioprocessors worked to restore rather than destroy. In the command nexus, Sarah's hybrid consciousness became the moderating influence that ensured the transformed hunters would never again become the instruments of genocide. She was no longer entirely human, but she was still fundamentally herself, the young woman who had wanted nothing more than to prove that different species could work together. Months later, when the first diplomatic vessels reached the transformed nexus, they found Sarah waiting for them. She was changed, her consciousness now distributed across multiple bodies, both organic and artificial, but her essential nature remained unchanged. She was still the bridge between species, still the proof that cooperation was stronger than conflict. Zephdar was among the first to arrive, and, when he saw what she had become, his expression held wonder rather than loss. "You did it," he said simply. "You saved them all." Sarah smiled with a dozen different faces, her consciousness touching his mind with gentle warmth. "We saved them all," she corrected. "You taught me that the greatest privilege is having the power to choose sacrifice. But, you also taught me that sacrifice doesn't have to mean loss. Sometimes, it means becoming something greater than you ever imagined possible." The galaxy that emerged from the war was transformed. Humans, Zephyrians, Altarians, and dozens of other species worked together with their former enemies to build a civilization based on cooperation rather than conflict. The hunters, guided by Sarah's hybrid consciousness, became the gardeners of the galaxy, using their vast abilities to nurture life rather than destroy it. And, at the heart of it all, Sarah Chin continued to be what she had always been, the proof that understanding was stronger than fear, that love was more powerful than hatred, and that sometimes, the greatest victory came not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them remember what they had forgotten about themselves. The young woman who had once stood alone in the ruins of Kepler Station had become the conscience of an entire galaxy, and, in doing so, had finally found her way home.